Okay, strap yourselves in, folks, because today we are diving deep into, infidelity and all the emotional chaos that comes with it. Betrayal, the kind that just leaves you reeling.
Oh, yeah.
It can be brutal. And we're going straight to the source for this one, chapter 7 of a book that doesn't hold back.
Yeah.
We're talking the raw, visceral reactions to infidelity. Think rage, self-blame, even revenge.
Right, and we're going to see it all, from boiling clothes to some pretty intense revenge rituals.
Oh, yeah, the stories are wild. But we're not just here for the drama. We're going beyond the surface to really understand why we react the way we do. Why infidelity hits us so hard.
Like a double-edged dagger. The pain is so deep, so sharp, and it can go in two directions, right?
Yeah.
You can turn it inward and blame yourself, or you'll lash out at the person who betrayed you.
It's like a punch to the gut that you never saw coming.
Exactly. And, the chapter really captures that feeling of being completely disoriented, like with Gaia. Her emotions are all over the place. One minute she's clinging to hope for reconciliation, the next she's burning with anger.
Makes sense. It's a roller coaster.
Totally. And then there's Buddy. I mean, talk about a tangled mess. He's actually contemplating suicide. But at the same time, he's blaming his wife for his pain. It's heartbreaking and confusing.
It's like you're drowning in all these intense emotions and you don't even know which way is up.
Exactly. And the thing is, there's no right way to react to this kind of betrayal. Everyone's different. The chapter even shows us Ming. She's this self-blaming caretaker. And I mean, surprisingly explodes with rage at her husband. It really makes you question those assumptions we have about how people should act right.
It's almost like there's this hidden capacity for fury in all of us that just erupts when we're pushed too far.
And that brings us to a fascinating point. That tendency we have to blame ourselves, it's so common. And the chapter delves into this through Dylan's story.
Okay, what happened to Dylan?
Well, imagine this. You're Dylan. You find out your girlfriend's been cheating on you with your best friend.
Oh, man, that's rough. I mean, just talk about adding insult to injury.
Right. And so he's dealing with what the chapter calls negative grandiosity.
Negative what?
Grandiosity. It's this interesting psychological thing where self-pity morphs into self-blame. So Dylan goes from feeling sorry for himself to basically saying, this is all my fault, convincing himself that he somehow drove her away.
It's like he's desperately searching for a reason for something he did wrong to make sense of it all.
Exactly. And it's so important to remember there's a huge difference between taking responsibility for your part in relationship issues and taking the blame for your partner's infidelity.
It's like you're carrying the weight of their actions when it wasn't yours to carry at all.
Exactly. And it gets even worse for Dylan because he finds out that everyone else knew about the affair.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He was the last to know. The fool everyone's been pitying behind his back.
Ouch. Talk about a blow to your pride.
Yeah. It adds a whole other layer of humiliation. You start questioning your own judgment, your whole social circle, everything.
It's like you've been robbed, not just of your relationship, but also your dignity, your place in the world. And I bet that feeling of humiliation often fuels that fiery desire for revenge.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The chapter really dives deep into the psychology of revenge. It's amazing how creative and intense these desires can get.
Okay, spill the tea. What kind of revenge schemes are we talking about here?
Well, there's a whole spectrum. Some
Gotcha.
people, they go for the symbolic approach, exposing the affair to the family, ruining clothes.
Oh, yeah. Classic.
Right. But then others, they get more vindictive.
Right.
Think selling possessions or leaking personal information online.
Wow. They go all out. It's like that betrayal just unleashes this torrent of pent-up emotions.
It does. And what's interesting is this fascination with revenge, it's not limited to personal vendettas. Think about Carrie Underwood's Before He Cheats.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We all know those lyrics, we sing along, and we get that little bit of satisfaction when someone who's wronged us gets what's coming to them.
It's like revenge taps into this primal part of us, this deep-seated desire for justice, even if it gets a little twisted sometimes.
Exactly. And the chapter even talks about how legally, crimes of passion are often treated more leniently, especially in certain cultures. It's almost like society recognizes, on some level, just how intense these emotions can be.
So even when we know, rationally, that revenge might not be the healthiest response, there's still a part of us that's drawn to it.
Yeah, it's powerful. And the chapter suggests that one reason for this is that betrayal forces us to confront all the sacrifices we've made, all the compromises.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. Suddenly you're tallying up every time you put your needs aside for your partner, and the resentment just comes flooding in.
It's like a switch flips.
Right.
All that past generosity turns into bitterness and a desire to strike back.
Exactly. And the chapter uses the story of Sean and Jenny to illustrate this. Sean dedicated years to supporting Jenny, even putting his own career on hold. Yeah. But then he finds out about her affair, and all that giving turns into this burning need to even the score. He feels robbed. And he wants to ransack her life the way she ransacked his.
It's heavy stuff. It sounds like when betrayal gets tangled up with years of resentment, that urge for revenge can be almost impossible to reason with.
Absolutely. And that brings us to this crucial concept the chapter introduces. Containment.
Containment.
Yeah. It's not about suppressing the anger completely. It's more about managing it, making sure it doesn't lead to you doing something destructive.
So finding a way to channel that rage without letting it completely take over.
Exactly. And sometimes that means finding creative outlets for those vengeful impulses.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. How do people try to manage these intense emotions?
Well, we'll dive into those strategies and explore what happens when revenge takes the form of, you guessed it, more infidelity in part 2 of our deep dive. So you know how we were talking about channeling that urge for revenge? Well, some people, they try to fight fire with fire. The chapter actually explores this through Jess and Leilani. Both of them decide to cheat on their cheating partners.
Wow, talk about an eye for an eye. But why? What drives that kind of corrective cheating, as the book calls it?
Well, it's a mix of things, really. There's that primal urge to regain power, right? To inflict the same pain you feel. It's almost like leveling the playing field.
Yeah, like balancing those inner scales of justice.
Exactly. Plus, there's that little voice whispering, well, they did it first, so why not me?
Right, there's that sense of justification, like, I'm allowed to do this because I was wronged. But remember Dylan's story. Trying to find that perfect balance through revenge can be tricky.
Absolutely. And the chapter really highlights this point. Revenge doesn't always bring the closure we're looking for. In fact, it often just prolongs the hurt, adds more layers of complexity.
Yeah, you're just piling on more pain.
Right. And both Jess and Leilani are struggling with this. On one hand, they want their partners back. But on the other hand, they're terrified of being hurt again.
Yeah, you're trying to mend a broken heart while also guarding it from more damage. That's got to...
It is. It's that push and pull between vulnerability and self-protection that makes these situations so difficult to navigate. And then the chapter introduces another interesting case, Alexander.
Okay, what about Alexander?
Well, he's in an open relationship.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Even though he's not bound by traditional monogamy, when his girlfriend crosses a boundary they had agreed on, he still gets hit with that wave of jealousy and rage.
That's interesting. So even in open relationships, you're not immune to those intense emotions.
Exactly. It really challenges those assumptions we have, right? Alexander's story shows us that even with different relationship structures, certain actions can still trigger those deeply ingrained feelings of possessiveness and betrayal. It's like, even if you intellectually believe in non-monogamy, those primal emotions can still creep in.
So how do we manage this anger in a way that doesn't cause more harm?
Well, the chapter suggests a few coping mechanisms that can be really helpful, like physical activity.
Oh, yeah, working out.
Right, going for a run, hitting the gym. It's a great way to release that pent-up energy. And then there's creative expression.
Like what?
Things like journaling, painting, even writing music. Anything that allows you to channel that raw emotion into something productive.
Yeah, it's like redirecting that energy instead of letting it fester.
Exactly. And it's important to set boundaries for those vengeful thoughts. You're not denying the anger, you're just choosing how to respond to it.
So, like, give those thoughts their space, but don't let them take over your life.
Right. And, Alexander, he actually found solace in those pre-established boundaries of his open relationship. He was able to remind himself that even though his girlfriend's actions were hurtful, they didn't violate their fundamental agreement.
It's like having those open and honest conversations beforehand, setting those clear boundaries, can actually help you navigate those tough situations later on.
Absolutely. And in the end, Alexander chooses to communicate his feelings to his girlfriend, rather than seeking revenge. They work together to repair the hurt and strengthen their relationship.
That's a great example. It shows that even when faced with betrayal, open communication and a willingness to work through it can be really powerful.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of healing, the chapter introduces a powerful alternative to the whole revenge cycle, restorative justice.
Okay, restorative justice. We talked about it a bit earlier, but how is it different from the traditional kind of punitive justice.
Well, while traditional justice focuses on punishment, restorative justice aims to repair the harm caused by the betrayal and pave the way for healing. And the chapter says that how someone responds to betrayal often reveals what kind of justice they're actually seeking.
Interesting. What do you mean?
Some people, they focus on the relational loss. They're grieving the damage to that connection they cherished.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. But others fixate on the narcissistic injury. They're consumed by the humiliation, the blow to their ego.
So it's like those who focus on the relational loss are mourning the relationship itself, and those who focus on the narcissistic injury are mourning, like, their hurt pride.
Precisely. And, those who prioritize that relational loss, they're more likely to approach the situation with compassion and curiosity.
Yeah, they're more open to understanding what happened.
Right. And that openness can create a path for repair, whether or not they ultimately decide to stay in the relationship. However, those who get stuck on that narcissistic injury, they often get trapped in that cycle of blame and vindictiveness.
Yeah, if you're constantly focused on how you were wronged, it's got to be harder to move past the anger.
Exactly. And the chapter has this powerful example of restorative justice in action. Camille's story.
Okay, tell me about Camille.
Well, she's French, and she's married to Amadou, who's from Mali. And in Mali, polygamy is more accepted.
Okay.
So she discovers his infidelity. And at first, she's overwhelmed with this mix of pain and anger. She's experiencing both the relational loss and the narcissistic injury.
So she's feeling that tug of war between the hurt and the blow to her pride.
Absolutely. But what's remarkable is how she uses her understanding of her husband's cultural background to create a plan for restorative justice.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What kind of plan did she come up with?
Well, she starts by enlisting the help of a respected elder in the African community. And she asks them to reprimand Amadou, not for having multiple partners, but for choosing someone within their social circle, which is actually a big no-no in his culture.
Oh, clever.
Right. And then she uses his cultural beliefs against him, complaining about his sexual performance, which is a huge source of shame in his culture. And to really emphasize her commitment to saving the marriage, she even stages this elaborate halal lamb sacrifice ritual.
Wow, she's really tapping into those cultural nuances. It's like she's speaking his language, but with a message tailored to her needs.
You got it. She's reclaiming her power and setting boundaries in a way that makes sense in their cultural context. But she doesn't stop there. Remember those vivid examples of revenge we talked about? Well, she actually takes inspiration from them. She makes this potent concoction with shea butter and chili peppers to, quote-unquote, massage him with if he ever strays again. And to really drive the point home, she confronts the other woman directly, fiercely marking her territory.
It's like she's drawing power from both her own upbringing and her husband's traditions, creating this multi-layered response. It's not just revenge, it's a statement.
Exactly. She's taking control. But the story doesn't end there. We'll find out what ultimately happens with Camille and Amadou in part 3 of our deep dive.
Okay, so last we heard, Camille was really taking charge, right? Reclaiming her power in a way that honored both her own background and her husband's. But did it work? Did her approach actually lead to healing, to reconciliation?
It did, but not in the way you might think. You see, Camille's most powerful act of restorative justice. It wasn't the ritual or the confrontation or even that spicy massage threat. It happened a year later, when she bumped into the other woman at her children's music class.
Oh, wow. It's about an awkward encounter.
Yeah. Camille admitted she was flooded with anger in that moment, even had fantasies about, using her karate skills. But then something shifted. She realized that lashing out, it would only give the other woman the satisfaction of seeing her broken, still consumed by the betrayal.
That's a really powerful realization. It's like she chose to take back her narrative, refusing to let this one event define her.
Exactly. Instead of giving in to the anger, Camille decided to play a different game. The next week, she went all out. Vibrant African dress, makeup, radiating confidence and happiness. And she intentionally walked right past the other woman's car, head held high.
It's like she was saying, look at me, I'm thriving, without even saying a word.
You got it. For Camille, that display of happiness, that was her ultimate revenge. She realized that hurting herself in the process of trying to hurt the other woman, it wouldn't achieve anything. Instead, she chose to rise above, to show that she wouldn't be defined by this betrayal.
It's a powerful message. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well, focusing on your own happiness and growth.
Absolutely. And this brings us back to Alexander's story for a moment. Even though he was in an open relationship, he still felt that jealousy when his girlfriend crossed the line.
Right.
It reminds us that even when we try to rewrite the rules, we're all still human. We all have those primal emotions wired into us.
And those emotions, they can be powerful, so managing them constructively, that's key, like you were saying earlier, containment.
Right. Recognizing that anger is a natural response, but finding a way to channel it so it doesn't lead to destruction.
Like Camille did with her rituals, and Alexander choosing to communicate with his girlfriend.
Exactly. You're creating a safe space for those emotions. You know, maybe journaling your revenge fantasies or setting a time limit for dwelling on those thoughts, even agreeing on a symbolic act of payback with your partner.
So it's about taking control, choosing how to respond to the betrayal, rather than just reacting in a way that could cause more harm.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. When you're faced with betrayal, do you tend to focus on the relational loss or the narcissistic injury?
That's a good question for our listeners to ponder. Because recognizing our own tendencies, that's the first step towards choosing a path that leads to healing and growth.
Well said.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Boiling clothes, spicy revenge rituals, self-blame, open relationships. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that even in the face of betrayal, we have a choice.
Absolutely. Understanding the psychology of it all, why we react the way we do, that gives us the power to navigate these experiences in a healthier way.
It's about reclaiming our agency, choosing resilience over resentment, and ultimately finding a way to move forward, stronger and wiser.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time for another exploration of the